Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter, let me look it up, 302? I think it's 302, yes it is. Anyway, I'm recording this on Monday. I couldn't record on Sunday just because I was a little bit too busy, but here we are. So for this video, what's going to end up happening is the general notes are pretty in-depth. So because of that, the page-by-page walkthrough is going to be relatively shorter on a few spots. But it's going to be overall a pretty nice little bit of a chat when it comes to this chapter. So before going in, what I want to say is this is a reconciliation chapter. A good part of it is reconciliation. And what I mean by that is when you look at the chapter, what it really exists to do is reconcile the flashbacks that we've had all throughout the series, or the flashbacks that were started earlier in this very arc. This chapter is coming in here and it is addressing a lot of the weirdness that was going on with the early parts. When you see this happening, it's really it's really rare. This is actually really cool. It's really cool to see this happening in real time. It's really cool to see the author looking at things in the past and putting them together and making them flow in a relatively coherent story. The reality is, even if the author had many shifts in his plans, and I do believe there were many shifts in the plans because of the way that some things have ultimately come out, I do think there were many shifts in the plan. But what does it matter if your plan is changing over the course of like what, 5 years, 4 years, however long? When it comes down to it, it ultimately doesn't matter how many shifts in the plan you have, so long as you make it all look like it fits together at the end. I mean, the worst that's going to happen is that hawk-eyed readers are going to try and point out that maybe there were shifts in the plan, but otherwise, like, what does it matter? Really, the reconciling, it's cool to have it here. It's cool to have it occurring, and I'll point out all the spots that are reconcile moments where he's trying to connect this story to the past of Hero Academia. Now, before I get into that, I just want to very quickly say, I do think we've found a legitimate mistake. I do think there is something incorrect here. Not counting what the anime was doing, because the anime, that's a whole other thing. But I do think there is legitimately something incorrect based on the translations that we have. And when we get there, I will point it out to you. Anyway, let's get into it. When it comes to reconciling, the first one that was really amazing was page 3. Look at page 3, right? Then look at this page from chapter, I have it here. Here we go. Chapter 39. It is so similar. Good on him. So he's reconciling this. When you look at page 2 and 3, you could already see what was happening in page 2. In page 2, you had the kids coming in wanting to play. In page 3, you had the full context. So this was really neat. This is definitely what told me, the first thing that told me that he was going to reconcile. The moment that I saw, even on the spoilers, for Yumi playing with that ball, I'm like, oh, he's going to call back that moment when Shoto was looking outside. That was great. That was excellent. Now, I will point out, ultimately, translations, you know, fickle. In the past, the translation still on Viz is your brothers, they belong to a different world than you. And then you have like the actual translation nowadays being your siblings belong to a different world than you. Fuyumi was already in play all the way back then. So like really, this is just translation issue from Viz side. Clearly the thing is siblings, but whatever. No, this was really cool. It was really cool to reconcile it. Now, the only added context here is that Toya was still crazy, right? Now, the other discrepancy that the author was reconciling ultimately comes roughly around page 9. Now, this is such, when you have a very unusual detail, that's when you know that the author is specifically thinking, or, you know, that's when it suggests the author is thinking like, I need to make sure I address this. And what he was addressing in page 9 is the height discrepancies. Like, why was this kid so short compared to Fuyumi? So here we had the explanation, oh, well, you know, Toya was small because he was premature and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, he got taller than Fuyumi because he ultimately had a growth spurt. It's like, all right, you know what? You have to justify it like that? Sure. You can go ahead and justify it like that. He had puberty. Okay, not a big deal. Didn't need to know he was premature, but I understand what's going on here. Toya's always been strangely short. With this detail, you can tell, like, you don't really need him to be premature to justify his flames developing. Puberty itself is so dramatic that you can just have puberty itself be the plot device that says, oh, because he had significant hormonal shifts, he developed blue fire, and that makes sense because puberty is that time period when teenagers are getting all kinds of hormones, or their feelings are being ratcheted up to 120%. Yeah, no, puberty by itself stands fine. The premature comment is there specifically to justify the weirdness of Toya being so short. But the author justifies it, so who really cares? This is a good job. This is better than if he didn't address it at all, because otherwise we would be kind of still spinning our wheels. At this point, also worth pointing out, the anime is 100% wrong. And don't even get me started on what it means that the anime had such a significant miscommunication with the author that they got this kid's hair wrong twice. Don't even get me started on what that might imply. But we're going to move on. The crying. The crying is actually also another small discrepancy, reconciliation type thing. But it's also an interesting comparison point. So we find out that when Toya gets worked up, he starts crying. So this is important because this tells us why exactly Dobby cries. Why he cries blood. It's when he's getting emotionally worked up. When I look at it here, this does seem like a little bit of a stress reaction for me. And really, when I see him crying as a response to him getting worked up, it kind of makes it easier to compare him to Shigaraki in the sense that Shigaraki also has a stress reaction, that being the way he scratches himself. For Toya, his stress reaction is just he cries a lot. And when you spot him in the chapter, whenever he's having an emotional moment, he's crying. This might also be there because the author trying to justify why Toya cried so much around Natsu. And for this chapter, it was just going to very quickly say it was cool to see exactly how Natsu's relationship with Toya worked. It was a little bit more twisted than Natsu gave credit for. But yes, I like the crying detail. Now, where you have so many wonderful connections, there is something interesting that is hard to reconcile because of some strange things. So here's the interesting thing. This is from chapter 250. Let me read what Fuyumi said. Natsu and Toya were so close, they were always playing together. It was shortly after mom went away. Her condition somehow got even worse, to the point that Shoto couldn't even visit her. What Fuyumi is saying here is that the accident happened after Rei left. We can still make this work with the few pages that we have, but we have to look at the sequence of events here. Toya asks for Endeavor to come to the mountain on his next day off. Endeavor does all that to Rei. He reacts really violently. And then we clip to him on the mountain with even Rei saying that she didn't know what to say to him, right? The question here is, if we're looking at Fuyumi's dialogue, did Rei dump water on Shoto between when Toya asked for Endeavor to go to the mountain and the accident itself? Here's the thing. That's a stupid question to ask when you have Rei saying that it was after Toya was gone that Rei got worse. She's admitting that herself. In other words, when it comes to the English language translation, we have a pretty severe contradiction, which doesn't help the thought that Horikoshi had been adjusting his plans throughout and wasn't able to keep up with the changes. If the translation holds for the Japanese version, what we can say happened here is that when it came to Fuyumi's line, maybe at that time the author was thinking that Rei leaving aggravated the situation with Toya, which caused the accident or contributed to it even more. Whereas now, what's being implied, well, not even implied, what's being said is that the accident, Toya dying, made Rei worse. Only after the accident did Rei start seeing Shoto and Natsu as Endeavor more. One more thing I want to point out is that, as it turned out, I have a copy of the fan translation for that time period. So check it out. The fan translation also suggests that the accident happened after Rei initially left. So that's really cool. We have two sources making the same kind of translation. At this point, what we can say for sure is that when it comes to the English translation, we do have incorrect information when it comes to chapter 250. It depends on you how lax you want to be with it. I think this is legitimately a mistake as opposed to Fuyumi being an unreliable narrator, because no one questions Fuyumi about her recollection of events. And again, in Fuyumi's logic, she has a clear cause and effect relationship linked to Rei's descent. So that is the reconciliation point. Let's go to another general topic, that being the fault applied here. So when it comes to the fault, it gets kind of messy, like assigning fault. What I'm pretty clear on though is Natsu and Fuyumi are not at fault. I understand that, you know, now that they have hindsight, they're guilty. And that makes sense, because when you have hindsight, you know better. That's the point of hindsight. That said, to think that these kids could do better in the situation that they were in is exceedingly unreasonable. And I know that we can say, well, sometimes kids are really smart. Like, look at Toya. Toya was already a manipulator at the tender age of 13. Toya was already pre-Dobby at the age of 13. But when you look at Fuyumi and Natsu, the thing that counters that is that we see them as kids. We see what they did in real time. When it comes to Fuyumi, we see her scared. You're expecting a scared little girl to be capable of looking past that fear? Look, man, a lot of adults can't do that. Why are we assuming that the girl's going to be able to do that? Both Fuyumi and Natsu grew up in a relatively safe environment. They were relatively well off. They probably aren't as equipped to deal with these problems. And when it comes to Natsu, don't even get me started on him. Natsu, originally I was going to go much harder on him, because in the fan translations, Natsu was saying that he should have whacked Toya to like knock him out of it, which honestly wouldn't have worked. But in the real in the Viz translation, he would have slugged Endeavor in the face. And here's the problem with Natsu. It's cool that he can say that now, but as a kid, we already know what Natsu was like. One, he was hiding with Fuyumi. Both of these kids were too caught in their fear cage. They weren't going to get out of it. Worse off is that Natsu was hearing the insanity that Toya was whispering into his ear. And what did he do? He didn't know what to make of it. He told the guy to piss off. Natsu didn't understand what was going on in the situation. So when you have these two spots of these kids' behaviors, and you're coming into this chapter and you're saying that they're actually at fault aside from what they believe, it's like, nah. These two are not at fault. We already know how they were in that particular situation. They didn't know any better. Nah. When it comes to the parents, I think, yeah, they're both at fault. I think Ray less than Endeavor. Like, when it comes to Ray and Endeavor, what I'm really thinking is like, here you have Toya. Ray knows that Toya is going out into the woods and lighting fires for a long time. She knows before Endeavor did, and I'll point that out when we get into the chapter itself. She knew for a period of time before Endeavor did, so she's known about it for longer. And then one day the accident happens. This, to me, when it comes to like thinking about the fault here, this is I think in a way comparable to, let's say there's two parents and they know that their kid is drinking and driving, and the kid is doing this for like 5 years, right? Do you think that when an accident happens at the 5th year and it claims the kid's life, and let's say it claims the life of a random pedestrian, right? Do you think the excuse, oh, but he had been doing this for 5 years without problem, do you think that excuse is going to fly? Yeah, no sane person is going to be looking at this when something's gone wrong saying, oh yeah, no, that's totally reasonable. Of course, he had 5 years of experience. No one's going to say that. That's not how that thing works. So that's the ultimate problem here with Ray and Endeavor. I still think those two still probably at significant fault here. Although I will say, when it comes to Ray, and maybe this could be applied to the author's habits. When Ray said in the last chapter that she didn't see that boy either, I was really expecting much worse for her. But in this chapter, I don't know, like this chapter seemed a lot more reasonable, because Ray's situation, she's in a really bad spot. Endeavor's hurling abuse her way, and Toya's hurling abuse her way. And we already know she's fragile, so, to some degree, Ray did do stuff. And the big thing is that you had that one moment before Toya rips into her where Ray might have been actually looking at the situation and might have seen a good chunk of the problem. Her only sin there was having the wrong word choice. Now, mind you, this is a chapter titled The Wrong Way to Put Out Fire Part 2. And the big thing is that at the end of the day, both parents acknowledge they didn't know what they were doing. Even Ray at the end there was just saying, well, I could have done better. But really, when I look at the previous chapter, the author set it up to make it look much worse. Whereas this case with Ray in particular ends up being a little bit more nuanced. The big thing, though, is that this is just parental negligence. That's the big thing you take away from it. The parents should be held accountable for parental negligence. Ray should be held accountable for parental negligence. She knew what was going on. She let it happen. She didn't tell Endeavor. Mind you, she was afraid, but parental negligence, that sin still legitimately stands for both of them. Now, unfortunately, at this point, we also have to talk about societal values because during the live streams, people are pointing out, well, there's a lot of cultural values here. And maybe in Japan, the idea of saving face would lead to a situation where you don't really ask for help when you really need help, especially when it's your own kid. So there's a lot of other little problems here. But at the end of the day, we have to be willing to say the same way that the parents are saying it. Yes, legitimate fault. In terms of Rei, the big thing that we were looking at avoiding when it came to these chapters is the unfair allotment of blame. I don't think there is unfair allotment of blame occurring between Rei and Endeavor. I think what they're saying is pretty on point. I think it's fair. No one's being assassinated, and Endeavor legitimately is taking his hits. So I think we're doing well here. That said, we still have more general points, because there is something a little bit unfair, I think, occurring with someone in the chapter. And this leads me to Shoto. This leads me to the little rhetoric that Rei makes up for Shoto about Shoto being this family's hero. So, personally, I don't think Shoto is the family's hero. At least, you can't say Shoto is just the family's hero. Even Shoto doesn't believe it because Izuku's on his mind when Rei's talking about it. It's clear to me, though, that he is Rei's hero because she wanted his forgiveness, but even there we can't overlook the other unsung hero just because the author wants to feed us his Shoto propaganda. So like I said earlier, Shoto acknowledges Izuku's role in all of this because really Izuku is Shoto's hero because he's the one that allows Shoto to be what his mother sees in him. But there was one more person, and that's Fuyumi. What the author did here was horrid, I believe. You're telling me that only Shoto is saving his family when it's been Fuyumi who has been trying to hold this ship together before Shoto got saved? Yeah, right, nah. Horikoshi is only saying this because he wants to prop up Shoto, because Shoto's one of the main characters. And you can tell that in the way that he slots Fuyumi in with the other two and downplays her. Fuyumi should be nowhere near the Blame Fest panel of Endeavor, Rei, and Natsu. I sincerely don't think she belongs in that grouping, but this is where we can see the author's hand a little bit more clearly. So let's recap, just to remind ourselves the nuance when it comes to Fuyumi. It wasn't Shoto that invited Shoto's friends to their house. That was Fuyumi. That event got Izuku even more involved, which is the friend that Rei seems to be, celebrating there. Shoto made friends, but at the end of the day, it's Fuyumi bringing those friends into the mix. Fuyumi even asked Shoto, oh, you haven't told them? It's because Shoto has no real agency when it comes to these particular issues. And without the agency, Izuku doesn't get involved, and Izuku's the real hero. And Izuku being the real hero is the one that helps Shoto out there. Anyway, I digress, not about Izuku. Anyway, point is, it wasn't Shoto that invited friends to their house. It wasn't Shoto that was facilitating conversations between the family. It was Fuyumi. It wasn't Shoto who was navigating the turbulent waters called Natsu and succeeding at getting him to participate in family gatherings. That was Fuyumi. It wasn't Shoto who was constantly visiting Rei at her worst time when Shoto himself wasn't visiting her. That was Fuyumi. Who knows how bad Rei would have been if Fuyumi hadn't been there to check up on her. And it most certainly wasn't Shoto bridging the gap to Endeavor. That was Fuyumi. It wasn't Shoto bringing Natsu and Endeavor together to have them have more opportunities to talk. That was Fuyumi. And it most certainly wasn't Shoto giving Endeavor a chance to fix things, at least early on. The reality is that Shoto is only able to be the hero here because of the foundation that Fuyumi built and maintained. Shoto isn't the one that's bringing the family together. He's the one that holds the family, while Fuyumi is the one that corrals them long enough for him to be able to glue them together. Ultimately, when you have Rei talking here, this is Shoto propaganda trying to make him seem bigger than he is, and it's being propagated by the person that wanted Shoto's attention the most, the mother that disfigured him. Do not understate how guilty this woman is, because even she is not able to escape from how guilty she is about that whole situation. And you know what the most funny thing is that Shoto is not the most compelling Todoroki, and the author proves it. Endeavor is the most compelling Todoroki, and the author agrees in the moment that he has Shoto summarize what he and his mom talked about instead of actually showing, opting instead to show Endeavor in beautiful detail. How many wonderful shots of Endeavor we got in these last little bits of the chapter. Of course we got those shots because Endeavor is significantly more captivating than Shoto at this moment in time when it comes to Horikoshi's writing. What that ultimately says is that when time is limited, when resources are scarce, it ain't Shoto getting the attention because Shoto can't really move much. It's Endeavor. And this is the pattern. Shoto just shows up at the end to help the situation, to support. He did it during the war as well. Endeavor does the majority of the legwork, and then Shoto comes in to like cover the bases a little bit. The author's doing it again here. Can you imagine having this face and then just having that massive talk just summarized? Actually, you don't have to imagine it. It's happening in real time. Imagine having a flashback that shows how bad these parents were at putting out a fire, in the author's words. Having that, and then having the author thinking it would be great to not show how good Rei had somehow become at defusing bombs, because that's pretty much what she did with Shoto. I would have loved to have seen what this woman could have said to Shoto, really showing me how she's grown, but instead I'm only gonna get the summary, maybe because who knows, maybe we'll get it in the future. I actually really hope we do get it. I actually really hope we do get it in the future, just a flashback to that talk. And the reason I'm saying that is because earlier I was being a little bit mean there. But I think, really, Endeavor is an easier character for Horikoshi to work with. I think that's why Endeavor gets more raw scenes, while Shoto just gets sold as the actual hero. In my opinion, Horikoshi can tell us that Shoto is the hero all he wants, but I am most certainly not going to accept that without applying the nuance that the manga has allowed for. Now, going into the future, this is only really a problem if Shoto keeps getting outshined by Endeavor, which I think is likely. Endeavor's personal rhetoric is much stronger than Shoto's because Endeavor has more things he can affect, and the author is willing to show Endeavor in more negative lights. And when you have more negative lights, you can really show a better underdog story. And in this case, Shoto's rhetoric is so weak that it can get resolved off screen. It can be summarized. When he does that, it's because the author is saying showing Shoto's talk with his mom is not as important as showing Endeavor suffering alone on his bed. So ultimately, if Shoto and Endeavor have to share screen time, Shoto's going to be in trouble. So we need to kind of separate Shoto away from Endeavor, but that's not going to happen. At the end of the day, Hawks isn't there to just help Shoto. He's there mostly for Endeavor. And so that's the interesting little situation that we're left with when it comes to Shoto, Endeavor, and the general family dynamics. So those were the general notes. Let's go in through the page-by-page walkthrough and see if we spot any other little details. So we're going to go in with page 1. Page 1 has the justification of the servant, how the servant came to be. I want to keep an eye on this servant. They might still play a part in this. As you all know, I'm very suspicious of the servant. The only problem here is figuring out, is acknowledging the servant a continuity nod, or is it a clue? Like, I hope it's a clue, but this could just be continuity to justify why there was a woman watching the kids. Anyway, on this page, note Endeavor's arm. So it seems like he got burned slightly. Pretty interesting that Horikoshi did not want to show such a traumatic scene, but the damage on the clothes indicate Endeavor stuck his arm out. And then you can kind of infer that this is happening right after the little incident, because Rei is wearing the same stuff and Shoto is still as cute as he was last time. Page 2 is 5 years later and the start of the flashback that starts reconciling the contents. On this page, we also get the age difference for Fuyumi and Toya being 1 year. Here we have Rei calling out Endeavor, which got a callback kind of at the end of the chapter. This is another page showing the nature of the problem, that being that these parents were averting their attention from the bomb that was right in front of them. Page 3 is a flashback, only now we get to see Toya's contempt. So like I said earlier, just a little bit of context. Page 4, creepiest page. Look, Toya's a manipulator. Once you're using guilt trips, impassioned tears, and making another person feel like you're all in this together, thereby sharing the identity of the group, you're a manipulator. This is Dobby Light right here. Like, this is just like 5 steps away from Dobby. This is one bad day away from Dobby. He's even questioning heroes in this line. I feel really bad for Natsu for being the only other guy. Page 5, Rei trying to be a parent, but she uses all the wrong words, unfortunately. Now, this is a double down page that also shows that Rei was trying initially. Worth pointing out that Rei might be right about the suffocating bit. So that would be consistent with the stuff from last chapter that Toya had said, especially when he talked about how Endeavor was his father, that because of that he didn't have any other choice. Like I said earlier, with her being able to see this well though, it's again a situation where Rei, I think you saw more of Toya than you initially implied. This seems relatively, like her dialogue there was good. Ultimately, Rei had more to do here than I would have thought after last week's page. Page 6 is the full-on verbal beatdown, like holy crap. Really interesting that Toya took aim at the grandmother as well, but that might have to do with his bias against the girls in the family. Also nice to have this confirmed that Rei's family was poor, which fits with what I wondered last week. The family probably fell from standing, and then they were riding off with what little assets they have. So that family, they're probably the type that like appearing like they're well established. They don't like slumming it like normal people. Anyway, page 7, Toya tosses guilt onto his mom for creating the situation through her passiveness. Pretty scathing. Fair point. Page 8 is Toya hitting puberty, like yikes. Anyway, it's neat that he found the link between feelings and the firepower. Legitimately interesting. And again, using puberty as a mechanism where feelings are amplified, I think is a really solid mechanism. Page 9 is Endeavor discovering Toya's secret, now being fully aware. This is the page where it's important to note that Rei was not telling Endeavor that Toya was going out. Otherwise, he would not have had that reaction early on. At this point, to defend Rei, important to remember that she was scared and spiraling, but that definitely didn't help the situation. Toya's desperation is really good here on these pages. I think it was really nicely depicted. Really appreciated it. Page 10 is an aggressive page where who knows what Endeavor did to Rei. Pretty rough. The page, as we mentioned before, was critical in painting just where the siblings were in this entire conflict and painting their mental landscape. Page 11 is the parents admitting that they didn't know what to do. And again, I think it's good that they admit that they had no idea what they were doing. But, you know, it's the future. Surely there had to be more researches. You know, here we come into that big talk about, can you expect people to apply due diligence? Can you expect people to know to ask for help? And then you take into account societal values like saving face, and it just becomes a giant mess. Ultimately, they both suck. Differing levels. They say they both suck. I agree. They both suck. Fuyumi and Natsu should stay out of this, though. Page 12, the incineration, which honestly, good on Dobby for coming out of that with patches of clear skin in some spots still. I'm really curious about that jawbone though. Like maybe he fell down a cliff and maybe that's how it shattered out or something like that. Do note it's really interesting that Endeavor, a man that needs to regulate his body temperature and has this as a crucial weakness, never tried to teach Dobby about temperature regulation, right? Like that's pretty interesting that your biggest weakness, you know that this kid has firepower, but you never tell him how to turn off the fire. Maybe Endeavor's not a great teacher either, on top of not being a great parent. Page 12, actually no, we already knew that. We already knew Endeavor's not a great teacher. Anyway, on this page, just also notice Endeavor is in his hero outfit. Page 14 was Endeavor giving reason for his tunnel vision. While the other members of the family start accepting blame, and we already covered this one. Page 15 is Rei picking Endeavor up with those flowers. I thought this was a really cool page. Really neat seeing Endeavor wowed by Rei. Like him actually saying like, are you the woman I married? He's like, yeah, nice. I like that she flatly tells him that he has no choice, because I really think Endeavor would do better with a stronger female role model in his life. I really hope that Rei doesn't get killed in turn because of that. I hope Rei is able to stay a positive influence in Endeavor's life and like really whip him into shape. I think he really needs to get whipped a little bit. I think he probably, he does. I think he'd do better with a strong presence in his life. Page 15 is the Shoto being a hero page while acknowledging the role that Izuku played in all this. Yeah, this is just Rei propaganda. Page 16, Shoto extending a hand of friendship towards Endeavor. So I like how this was drawn. I think this was really good. Shoto looking away really sells how kind of uncomfortable and how raw the situation is, especially with Shoto saying, you know, like once you're done crying, let's go and do this. And then at the end, we have Hawks and Genus eavesdropping, and it looks like Hawks wrote something to Best Genus, so it seems like we might be getting ready to see the plan, but it depends. This point right here is legitimately a good breakaway point. We could finally go back to Izuku. It could finally happen. We could go over there and be like, ah, yes, let's do that. So what exactly will happen next? Well, I think it would be really neat to have Endeavor go out and have a giant press briefing on the steps of the hospital with his family, and maybe have Hawks showing off some stuff in the background. I don't know. I think that would be neat. What other things? I hope Stain doesn't show up and try to kill someone. I hope someone doesn't try to assassinate Endeavor and then Ray ends up taking the hit. If Ray dies here, she's dying a martyr, and that's not going to be good for the villains. It's going to like really galvanize them. It's going to galvanize all of Endeavor's family against the villains in general. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Right now, I legitimately just want to see this finished. I don't want to jump to Izuku. I know I really want to see Izuku, but the reality is, if we jump away from this now, we're still going to get the content. That's the problem. To jump away from the content now, only to have it delayed, is just going to make things like a lot more infuriating. Or not infuriating, but annoying. That's why, if it's for the sake of finishing this giant comeback for the heroes, I am quite alright with delaying Izuku for like 2 weeks. I think that would be very fair. But yeah, no, this is a pretty solid breakaway point. And I still do want to see Dobby freaking out. So hopefully we get to see this relatively soon. Anyway, everyone, that's it for me, man. How long was this? Oh, 40 minutes. Excellent. That's pretty normal. Guys, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below. And until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day. And I'll see you next week. And for the people on the live stream, I'll see you on the live stream. Woo. Great.